Hello and welcome back to HEMA Fight Breakdowns. Today I'm going to be doing another kind of talky drama video because a certain YouTube video has been making the rounds in the HEMAsphere called Fencing is Broken. And a lot of people, including the rather disgusting people over at Blood and Iron, have made a response to this and tried to apply a lot of the critiques and points that SaberSlice made in his video towards HEMA. And I'm here to talk about whether or not any of these things are really relevant, and most importantly, to talk about why, when we get back to the Blood and Iron situation, we really do have a possibility of becoming like Olympic fencing, but it's probably not the way that a lot of people like to think. So to start off, if you haven't watched it already, definitely go and watch SaberSlice's video, Fencing is Broken, because it is a really nice video and it's very well put together, and it does a good job of describing, in a short and concise period, which obviously I'm not good at, what the problems with Olympic fencing are. Now, as a HEMAist, your expectation is probably that it's going to talk all about right-of-way. And that is not the case whatsoever. This might come as a bit of a shock for a lot of HEMA people, but right-of-way is not a fundamentally broken system, and it is not a system of judging that ruins a sport, despite what a lot of HEMA people might tell you. However, this is about the interpretation and the application of right-of-way. SaberSlice's video really comes down to the corruption of certain judges in the FIE and the corruption of the FIE overall as a governing body. So how does this really apply to HEMA? On the offset, the most obvious application is that it doesn't apply at all. HEMA has no governing body organization. There is no set rule set, and there is certainly no set rules or interpretations of how to apply rules for HEMA tournaments. As a result, there is no real possibility that someone can slip a 50 to a HEMA judge and get them to interpret the rules differently than how they may or may not have been written by the governing club that wrote them for the tournament that they happen to be judging for. It just doesn't really make sense. Sure, theoretically, there is a possibility that a club runs a tournament, staffs it with their own people who interpret the rules differently than how they wrote them down, but calling that corruption really doesn't have a lot of sting to it when there's not any money to be made. Slipping that person a 50 might be the only $50 they ever got for running an event, period. And again, it's just not going to have the same impact if they already drove 6 hours to be here. So I'm going to touch very briefly on the HEMA is Broken video made by Blood and Iron, and briefly because it's just not a very good video. It fundamentally misunderstands the point that SaberSlice is making about corruption, and instead tries to stand up on a soapbox and say the reason HEMA sucks and is broken is because it doesn't make any money. The irony being that money being the real reason that the FIE and the coaches under them and the referees under them are so corrupt. The reason, outlined by SaberSlice, is that a coach can be the head of a team, a referee, and the head of a major fencing school, all of which are revenue streams that can go directly to them. They can get paid to be at the event and be a referee. They get paid to be a coach on a team that's doing very well. Their team does very well because their position as a referee means they can give the benefit of the doubt to their own teammates, and then they run a school, which means all of the people who are currently fencing are paying them money just to learn how to fence. It's a great business model if you want to be a corrupt bastard, and that's unfortunately the kind of person that Lee Smith clearly wants to be. So the question is, what do we really as HEMAists stand to learn from watching these two videos? The problem here and the difference between HEMA and Olympic fencing, first and foremost, is that we have no governing body or organization. We have no upward funnel of money. We have no money at all. There are still clubs. Those clubs still pull in revenue from their students. They run tournaments that generate a lot of revenue from people signing up for them. But that's really where it stops. We don't pay our referees, we don't pay our coaches, most of us don't even have coaches, and we definitely don't pay our fighters. Now, if you ask Lee Smith, he says that this is the reason why HEMA sucks, because he can't make any money off of it. But, of course, the reason that SaberSlice lines up is that this money leads to corruption. And the irony here is that there is an understanding that HEMA is better than Olympic fencing right now because it doesn't have that same level of corruption. And you might think that because this complete lack of upward structure means that, well, how could anyone be corrupt? If there's no money to be made, there's no reason to do all of the things that these Olympic fencing referees, coaches, school owners are doing. And so why would it ever happen? And in my opinion, that's actually a fundamental misunderstanding of what it is that makes HEMA not corrupt. So, coming down to the comment section of SaberSlice's video, there is, of course, in the top comments, a HEMA person trying to take the W for being the better sport. And very quickly, SaberSlice points out something that a lot of people in HEMA don't really seem to understand. HEMA being an amateur sport, meaning that it has no governing organization, does not actually make it less corrupt. It actually makes it more prone to corruption. And again, we only have Lee Smith's and the very existence of Blood and Iron to go off of here to prove that there can still be, and probably still is, a whole lot of corruption in the world of HEMA for no other reason than with no governing body to dictate the rules. Every individual organization can just do whatever they want. The idea that HEMA being a fractured and never whole thing means that no one can ever make any money by being a corrupt bastard just fundamentally doesn't understand that there's still tons of money and tons of corrupting things that you can do to make money at the level of the individual club. As I mentioned earlier, there's still the possibility and the real experience of places like Blood and Iron running tournaments where they staff them with their own top-level fighters who constantly gave Lee Smith himself a pass on black cardable actions and flat-out cheating actions. Why did they do this? Well, it wasn't for money. They weren't making any money from Blood and Iron for doing this, and they certainly weren't getting any praise or friendliness from Lee Smith for doing anything in general. They were doing it because they followed a cult of personality-like structure that centered Lee Smith at the center of everything. And the irony of Blood and Iron making a video about why HEMA is broken might be one of the most ironic things ever put onto YouTube. So, if you are a HEMA organization and you want to really learn from these two videos, what can you really do? You can't just make a governing organizational body that's going to dictate all the rules, and as we know from SaberSlice's video, this isn't going to suddenly make corruption stop. It might actually just give it a financial incentive that wasn't there before. But at the same time, you can't simply rely on being fractured and small to, evade corruption altogether. So what exactly do you do? And the answer is just don't be Lee Smith. But that answer is a lot more complicated than it sounds. There are a lot of people in the world of HEMA that make money by just being a bit of a cult of personality. There are a lot of YouTubers who make money off of pretending to be HEMA adjacent. And I only say pretending because it's very obvious that they don't really practice HEMA themselves. They just want to make content for people who exist in this very niche hobby. And because of that, this very niche hobby will sometimes monetarily enrich those people for giving them something, anything really. And the irony is that I think if you really want to solve this corruption problem, what you really need to do is get more involved in these spaces so that you can make what is really great about HEMA, the fact that so many people put in their own blood, sweat, and tears into making such a niche hobby viable without really any profit motive. You need to get involved so that the field of battle, so to speak, is filled with more people who care about where HEMA ends up and care less about how much money HEMA is making them. I don't want to point out anybody specifically, but I'll just use the classic punching bag of Shadiversity. Shadiversity is a person who doesn't really know or care much about history or HEMA overall, but they put on that veneer so as to attract all of the people who happen to exist within that sphere. And as a result, he branches out and expands that sphere more and more to people in the anime and manga communities and the TV and movie communities so that he can get as many people under his bubble as possible. And the irony is that this is a kind of corruption just in and of itself. Not corruption in the sense that he's making money, though he certainly is, but corruption in the sense that the more you expand HEMA to be more like other things, the more you might do what Lee Smith wants you to do and turn HEMA into more of like a WWE Boo Herd event or something, the more you're going to make money, but the more you're going to dilute HEMA with other things that already make money. And this is where we get to the primary thing that I think we can learn from both of these videos. If you want HEMA to be big, don't necessarily make it bigger by expanding its sphere of influence into other sports. If you want HEMA to be smaller, don't necessarily shrink it by putting it all of the onus of corruption and application and rules onto individuals who do have a monetary incentive to keep their image and their club and their noses clean of any kind of implications. Because when that happens, they're just going to become Lee Smith. So what you have to do is something really in the middle. You have to make sure that your HEMA club very carefully has a set of rules that it dictates to itself, but also recognize that the leaders of your club have to go out there and interact with the rest of the community. They have to be going out there, going to tournaments. They have to be sparring. They have to be hosting events. They have to be doing all the things that other HEMA clubs are doing to expand their umbrella within the HEMAsphere and not outside of it, because you have to be able to be a part of this global community so that there are other leaders, other people making money or not making money, who can keep you in check. The reason Lee Smith eventually got caught, the reason John Clements' Arma exploded, was because there were other people out there who were as good at what they did as they were. And the irony is that if there aren't other Lee Smiths out there, it really just means that the Lee Smiths that are out there, you just have never heard of. And that's probably the best outcome we can have. If we can make a very clear defense of the scope of HEMA as being people and competitors and teachers and historians that are forming a global community where we all respect and acknowledge each other as being on kind of the same level, that means that anybody who tries to make a cult of personality and a serious monetary gain out of this thing is going to very quickly get blown up, because they're just never going to be able to elevate themselves to the point where they become that central figure. You need to make sure that the Lee Smiths of the world are never considered the best at anything, because there's constant pressure from all the other members of the community for them to be better. So hopefully that makes a little bit of sense. Hopefully you now have a little bit of an actionable plan on what to do. And hopefully you don't watch that Blood and Iron video. Seriously, do not do it. So with that, that is going to be the end of this video. Hopefully this wasn't too long, and hopefully you don't mind a couple of rambly videos in the meantime while I wait for things like Helsinki to happen. So in the meantime, I will see you next Thursday for another video.